on this episode of the WildFed podcast.
Humanity is more comfortable but less happy and healthy than we've ever been before.
I became a hunter and a forager because I would have to get up in the morning and take a cold shower, then I'd have to fast, then I'd do the sauna to get hot. I'm doing so many different things to try to replicate these things that happen when you just go outside.
By putting ourselves in these situations where we face real challenge, real discomfort, we come back into our normal lives and we have a lot different perspective and we're better for it.
I look around at our culture today and everybody's so triggered and offended and outraged, and it seems to me that we're doing really, really well.
The only way that I'm ever going to keep living is if something else dies. The more aware people are of this life cycle, the happier they tend to be. And I'm going to focus on doing things that are truly going to make me happy and, really just focus on what's going to matter.
Episode 81 of the WildFed podcast, The Comfort Crisis with Michael Easter, is brought to you by Surthrival. If you haven't already heard, bovine colostrum, the first milk produced by cows after calving, is probably the most powerful immune-fortifying supplement you're going to find anywhere. That's because it's designed by nature to format the immune system of young calves, and our own physiology is similar enough that it works just as well in us too. In fact, when taken by humans, it's been shown to be 3 times more effective against flu than vaccines, even in high-risk patients. It's also a supreme gut lining regenerator and has become a nutritional ally to people with digestive system issues like Crohn's, IBS, and leaky gut syndrome. Surthrival produces the most premium powdered colostrum product on the market. It's creamy and delicious and makes a great addition to smoothies and blended drinks. Right now at surthrival.com, all colostrum products are 20% off. Head over to surthrival.com, that's surthrival.com, for 20% off all colostrum products. Do you feel called to hunting as a rite of passage? There are so many new or potential hunters who want to develop intimate relationships with wild animals and the landscape, but who aren't drawn to the commercialization of so much of modern hunting culture. That's where sacredhunting.com and its founder, Monsell Denton, come in. Monsell provides a space for new hunters to learn to hunt, stalk, harvest, and field dress animals in conjunction with land-based ceremonies that introduce you to hunting in a more intentional and spiritually connected way. Monsell and his team will guide you through beginner hunts, and more advanced hunters will find unique opportunities available across the country and globe, like Axe's deer hunts on Molokai in Hawaii, and even a northern Siberia hunt with the Nenets people coming up in 2022. There's only a few spots available per hunt, so go to sacredhunting.com and complete their 2-minute application. Discounts are available when you let them know you heard about them on the WildFed podcast. Again, go to sacredhunting.com and fill out the application. You can learn more about Monsell and Sacred Hunting on episode 59 of the WildFed podcast. I'm Daniel Vitalis, and you're listening to the WildFed podcast, a show about reconnecting with nature through hunting, fishing, foraging, and food. WildFed. Food is all around you.
I love the interview you're about to hear. My guest is Michael Easter, and he's the author of the new book, The Comfort Crisis: Embrace Discomfort to Reclaim Your Wild, Happy, Healthy Self. Trust me, you're going to want this one in your library. He'll share more of his story in our conversation, but suffice it to say, Michael was a writer for Men's Health magazine when he was assigned to a story following the modern hunter and filmmaker and our recent guest here on this show, Donnie Vincent, on a hunt to the Alaskan Arctic. Suffice it to say that trip changed the trajectory of Michael's life and led to his recently released book, The Comfort Crisis, which explores the connection between our incredible modern first world comforts and the corresponding lack of physical, emotional, and spiritual health that they engender. These are topics I've been exploring for years, as I am fascinated by the way the departure from our ancestral lifeway brings with it so many unexpected consequences. So, needless to say, I was quite invigorated by this conversation. Michael's distilled down one of the most impressive arguments for incorporating our ancient biological needs into our modern lifestyle, and he does it in a way that's both intriguing and also non-threatening. Along the way, he'll also share about his first hunt, a caribou in the Alaskan Arctic, and how that experience impacted and changed him. This is a great interview with a great author on a really great topic. And there's some real valuable takeaways, like how we can approach discomfort, how we can relate to death and our own death, and how our own success can sometimes, if we aren't careful, be our undoing. So take this one to heart. With so many voices out there suggesting we take the easy road, sometimes we need a reminder that the easy way isn't always, if ever, the fulfilling one. Michael Easter, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Daniel.
Hey, man, really cool book you just written, The Comfort Crisis. Embrace discomfort to reclaim your wild, happy, healthy self. I really, really like this concept, man. Tell us about it.
Well, I'm glad you enjoyed it. That means a lot coming from you. So it is essentially about how humanity is more comfortable but less happy and healthy than we've ever been before. So it kind of focuses on a handful of key evolutionary discomforts that can sort of return us to health and happiness, and also even help us experience what it means to be human, because we've sort of lost a lot as the world has tipped into comfort and convenience, and we're just not really challenged anymore in a lot of ways. So that's what it's all about.
I did a podcast before this one called Rewild Yourself, which focused on a lot of those similar themes. I looked at human beings as a domesticated species, and everybody I talked to, professors in so many different fields, academics in so many different fields, everybody, it always came back to this same thing. They all agreed that this sort of ancestral approach and our us coming away from it was degrading our health. And so when I saw the title of your book, I was like, wow, how did it take so long for somebody to write a book like this? Because it seems so relevant right now. But I first heard about you from Donnie Vincent. Tell me a little bit about how you connected with him and sort of what your background is and how this book came to be.
Yeah, for sure. So I was a high up editor at Men's Health magazine for a bunch of years. So it's really big men's magazine, distributed all over the world. My life was
kind of... everybody here listening is familiar.
Yeah, you should be at least
that magazine.
At least familiar. Yeah. So it's, I had this kind of cushy, comfortable lifestyle. I had kind of access to all these different people and stuff and all that. And, being in a job like that, I assumed I was, really healthy and, kind of a badass or whatever. And
yeah.
Then I get sent on this story with Donnie. So I'm going to go profile Donnie, and, he's going to take me on this hunt in Nevada. Eastern Nevada, up in these mountains. So it's like 10,000 feet up. It was a elk hunt in September. This was maybe 5 years ago. So anyways, I think I'm all prepared and healthy for this. And we get up there.
Can I ask you, can I break in for a second? Because you write for Men's Health, but you've also written for Outside as well, right? So I imagine you've done a lot of stories in the outdoors over the years. It's not like you hadn't been doing things outside, right? So you probably felt pretty ready for this.
I mean, I thought I was, but when I do stuff for Outside too, I focus on a lot of science. So I'm talking to a lot of scientists. I do a lot on fitness. So a lot of stuff happens in the gym. And, I had reported in the past on some of what are considered the world's most like hardcore extreme gyms. And I'd gone in there and trained in these places with guys, who were pro athletes and all this stuff. So I just think that I'm like ready for this. And, Donnie takes me up. And the thing is that so many different forms of stress get inserted when you go out into the wild, right? So I'm like totally out of my comfort zone this entire time. Like I'm freezing cold, I'm starving because we have to pack in our food and we don't pack in that much. I find that the fitness that I do have actually isn't that great for what we're doing, which is, carrying super heavy packs, up mountains all day. And even things like, when we glass for elk, we're sitting on this hill for like hours at a time and my cell phone doesn't work. And I'm like, what do I do with my brain right now? But the fascinating part is you would think I'd be miserable, but I wasn't. It was just a fascinating, interesting experience to me. When I got home, I just felt like a lot, healthier. I felt happier. I just felt sort of more zen and calm, I guess, and alive. And it's sort of, being an investigative journalist, when you have an experience like that, it ultimately is a question that comes up in your mind. And so I wanted to sort of just follow that thread and see where it led. And so I decided to kind of go all in on this thing. And I basically quit my job for Men's Health, more or less, became a professor. And this was so I could like really just research this thing, and travel because I have summers off or whatever. So I could really just like focus on what was going on here with
you were
comfort,
there, you were there originally on a Men's Health story, and then that led you to actually quit that job.
Yeah, that was a huge part of it. It was just like,
yeah, exactly. They're like, you know what? Let's stop sending people out on these kind of gigs.
Yeah. And so part of it is because, I mentioned when I get home, I feel so much better. But the other half of that is that I can see that like my life is unbelievably comfortable in every single way possible. I mean, if you just think about the average day of an average person, and I totally fit this bill. It's like you wake up in this soft bed, your home is temperature controlled, maybe you microwave your breakfast, you drive into work, you sit behind a screen, and you're sitting all day, and then you kind of come home, watch some Netflix, fire up some more food, and that's it. At no point are you ever challenged, And so, it sort of occurred to me that those challenges that I faced with Donnie up in Nevada were like, that was all new, but that's all stuff that we used to face every single day. And maybe that had something to do with how I was feeling. So went on this, big investigation, read a lot of studies, read a lot of ancient texts. I sort of traveled the world, spoke to, people ranging from scientists at Harvard to doctors at the Mayo Clinic, spent some time with, special forces soldiers and just all kinds of different characters that are kind of showing in their own unique way how these different forms of discomfort can really move the dial on our health and happiness. And part of it, and I'm sure we're going to get into this pretty deep, is that I did a hunt with Donnie, like Nevada on steroids. We went up to the Arctic for 33 days and hunted up there. That was kind of like, let's really go deep into this thing and see what happens. So in the book, that's actually the overarching narrative of the book. And then as you're learning about these handful of different discomforts that I've identified that I think that humans, need to face to help get us back to health and happiness, I'm sort of encountering them in the Arctic, and then I'll, really dive into some of the science and some of these characters that are really elucidating what's happening there.
It's interesting because all that comfort's a modern sign of success. It's like you're doing everything right. It leads to more and more comfort. I deal with this all the time. I'm always having to create moments of discomfort because my life doesn't have it. When I'm out in the field, I have some of it, but otherwise it's like not part of my daily life. And so it's like having to create surrogate discomforts to try to replicate a lot of these ancestral experiences. And what ended up happening, quick background on me is like I became a hunter and a forager, a wild food enthusiast, because what I kept seeing was I would have to stack so many little technologies, be like, get up in the morning and take a cold shower, or then I'd have to, fast. Then I have to, it started to be all these, then I'd do the sauna to get hot. Then I'm doing so many different things to try to replicate these things that happen when you just go outside. So I appreciate what you were saying about, even with all the things you were already doing, it was actually going into the field where you experienced a lot of those things. Because I always tell people like, hey man, you can make a really complicated health and fitness practice, and then you'll find that when you go into the field, a lot of those things just happen to you naturally.
Yeah, you nailed it. So I think really for me, so here's a story. At one point, so Donnie and I go up to the Arctic. We're also with William, his cameraman, and we were, hunting.
Who's a Mainer?
He is a Mainer. He is indeed a Mainer. He's a great guy, hilarious. We end up getting about 10 miles from camp, and it's the end of the day. And, we have to hike back. And the thing about the tundra is it is absolute hell to walk on. Like there's all these big tundra tufts of grass that are kind of like these basketball-sized tufts of grass. So you can either step on those, but they're super awkward. And in between all those tufts of grass is sort of this like mucky, half frozen mud that sort of saps all the energy from your steps. So it's like a mile out there is like 5 on sidewalk. It's terrible. And we have so far to get back to camp, but it's also one of those where at a certain point, it hits you that it's like, oh, like if we don't make it back to camp, this is actually very, very dangerous. Like we can't spend the night out in the middle of the Arctic
Yeah.
without a shelter. Like this is, you either make it back to camp or you can't. No one's coming out to save you. A rescue plane could never land where we were. And that's, I think, what going out in the wild can give people, because, you know, if you try to mimic this kind of stuff in a gym, it's like your brain is just, it's programmed to make you conserve energy, and it's going to tell you to tap out far before you've reached a limit that might be beneficial for you to face. You know, you're never going to have to go past that moment where you really want to tap out and quit, but you have to keep going because you're put in a position where you're going to find something new about yourself, you know?
Man, there's something there for me. I want to pull that apart a little bit because it has to do with the stakes being really high, you know, where, like you said, I'll often talk to people about how, hey, you have like a sweet tooth, because that allowed humanity to survive in an environment with very little sugar available. And you had to love that flavor, so you'd look for those calories. And you love the way fat feels in your mouth because it's so hard to find in nature. And you love being at your perfect room temperature because temperatures everywhere in the world fluctuate from night to day so extreme you can die. So these are good things built into us. It's just that now we're in an environment where we have too much of all of these things. It's too easy to thermoregulate. It's too easy to have sugar. There's too much fat. But we want to have that, like you said, we're programmed to conserve energy because of how hard it was to do that for our ancestors. And then the other piece I want to add to it is, have you ever read Endurance, the Ernest Shackleton story by Alfred Lansing?
I have not. I'm familiar with the book. I was actually looking at it on Amazon because I think a handful of people have said, read that.
Dude, what a read it is, man. But it's really outrageous. But, you know, when you read a story like that about this group of men who survived in the Antarctic for nearly 2 years, and what they went through every single day was pure hell. You're like, you just read it. You're like, I don't think I would make it. You know, I love being in the outdoors. I'm pretty tough. I don't know, man, if I had, but then you're like, it's the stakes. They had no choice. Whereas a lot of us know ourselves as quitters because we can, and we can get away with it. So yeah, curious just sort of how you see for modern people who are going to start to challenge and stress themselves a little bit. How do you stay motivated to do it when it's so easy to tap out?
So as part of this book, I went to Santa Barbara, California. There's a guy there whose name is Marcus Elliott, and he is he's brilliant. Two, he's super far out guy. So he was a Harvard MD, and you know, he was sort of top of his class. All his professors were like, "Okay, you got to get into, you know, teaching and researching and all this." And he'd always been fascinated by sports. Like he'd been this really top ranked triathlete before med school. And so that had sort of taught him something that, you know, there's layers to just sort of, if you put yourself in positions of some suffering, some good things can start moving. So he's now like the world's top sports scientist. He ends up taking a job with the Patriots. He helped them win a bunch of Super Bowls, and he's sort of been all over in pro sports. But he has this concept that he talks about called Misogi. Now, the backstory on Misogi is that there's this ancient Japanese text that basically has this hero's journey of this guy named Izanagi, and he goes down into hell, and he has to go through these hellish caverns and escape through hell. But he learns something about himself through this. So it's like by putting himself in this position of extreme discomfort where there's a high chance of failure, but making it, he comes out on the other end sort of purified, and his life is enhanced, and he sort of moves into this other stage of like being a lot more confident and competent in his life. And you tend to see stories like this, you know, across like time and throughout culture. So, you know, like the hero's journey, it's just a classic story. So this guy named Marcus Elliott, he decides he's going to start doing what he calls Misogis, but it's essentially doing something really, really hard once a year, something that's like kooky and out there that you can't compare yourself with others, and only really doing it for yourself. So a good example would be one year, him and a couple of the guys he does it with, they decide that they are going to stand up paddleboard across the Santa Barbara Channel. Now they've only stand up paddleboarded like 2 or 3 times in their life, right? So the point is that they want it to be, about a 50% chance that they're going to fail. And he's done these things every single year and done them with some athletes. And it really is a way that you can sort of put yourself in that position where you're going to have this moment where you want to absolutely quit, but you're not going to. And by not quitting, you're going to learn something about yourself. And when you look at these from an evolutionary perspective, it sort of makes sense why that could help us, move the dial on especially our mental health and sort of our sense of self and identity and confidence. Because, as we were evolving, humans had to do challenging stuff like all the time. Every week, every
single
month.
day. Every day.
Yeah, exactly. And this could be, we had to hunt. We had run out of food and we had to go on a hunt. And if we don't get food, well, we're going to be in quite a pickle. Or it could be, we have to move our family across a winter pass. And if we don't sort of dig deep and find our shit, well, we might actually die, Yeah. You also see it in things like rites of passage. So traditional rites of passage where they would send young men, it was usually young men, but sometimes women out into the world in some sort of real nature challenge, because when they got back, it was the sign that they were ready to sort of take on a family and move through life in a more prominent, confident position. So the moral of the story there is, trying to do something that's really going to be hard for you once a year, just one day, don't prep too much, just go out and try this thing, I think could be really life enhancing.
Man, that's awesome. I like this idea of rites of passage too. I'm really heavily tattooed, and every single day of my life, someone will come up to me and be like, "Didn't that hurt?" It's like, yeah, it really did, man. And that's why I did it. I think like something like that, the fascination with tattoo or piercing or any of those kind of things where it's like, if it didn't hurt, that's the point of it. It wouldn't be cool if it didn't hurt, or you see some of I don't know if you've ever seen that thing with the bullet ants down in South America where, the young man gets bitten by, hundreds of bullet ants at once. And it looks like such an awful torture. But that thing too, I think you mentioned working with special forces guys or talking to special forces guys where when you've come through a challenge that's really hard, and then you're greeted by a bunch of people who've done that same thing. So you all know that you've all done that thing, and that creates like a camaraderie, you see things today like Tough Mudder is a event I got to do a bunch of times, or Go Ruck is a really cool one that I've done, where you go through some kind of real difficult challenge and you do want to quit a bunch of times and you come out on the other end of it and you feel really great, of course, but then there's something to be said too for because I think that's something that's lost, and maybe we try to recreate it through sports or through other endeavors where it's not just you that survived it, but your community did, So you're talking about our evolutionary past, and it's like we went through those things with people. And so then you knew each other at this deep level. And today I feel like, we have a lot of friendships with people that we don't really know how they would hang when things got tough. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's a really great point. I've done a Go Ruck challenge as well, and you're right. I did this one that was it was 24 hours in New York, and you start. There was 50 people who started, about half dropped, but 24 hours later, when you've gone through this sort of almost hell week simulation with these guys, like when they said it was over, it's like I'm hugging these guys that 24 hours before I had no idea who they were, and we're high-fiving, and and I still keep in touch with some of them. And I think that that's really something we've lost as we've sort of tipped into this world of comfort where we want to remove challenges. So think about concepts like helicopter parenting, and now that's even snowplow parenting, where parents are just pushing all these challenges out of their kids' way. There's some research out of New York University, and it shows that levels of anxiety and depression really started to skyrocket in the generation when helicopter parenting came out, because people essentially need to be challenged, or else anything that comes their way that even resembles something like a challenge is going to break them, more or less, So when, for example, when we were up in the Arctic, we're very, very intelligent men, you should know, first of all. And so I
like where this is going.
Yeah. We pitched this Kafaru teepee out on this sort of knob on this hill, and it's protected from the wind was coming in one direction. It's protected. We have this awesome view. We're like, oh man, this is life is great. We have this unbelievable view looking out over the Arctic tundra and just rolls on forever. Like it's just unbelievable.
You're in Alaska?
Yeah. We're in Alaska in the Noatak National Preserve. And so we go to bed. Good. Can't wait to wake up and have breakfast with this view. Well, about 2 a.m., just pop, 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 pop. The winds end up shifting, and we start getting hit, just hammered with just the craziest wind. Probably at its peak, it was 70 miles an hour, So me, Donnie, and William, we're like up, it's pitch black. We have our headlamps on. We're like, what do we do? It's pitch black. We're just going to wait it out. The wind keep picking up. Finally, we know we're going to lose the teepee because it's probably gusting at 70, and this thing's just going to get wafted off into Russian airspace. So we have to pack all our stuff, and we have to run out, and we have to take down this teepee, and it's just this unbelievably stressful event because it was one of the first couple of nights. And had we lost the shelter, we would have been in a real pickle. I mean, shelter number one, that's kind of the rule of surviving in the wild. But we managed to take it down, and we survive. So then when I get back into normal life, the things that used to fluster a person in the modern world, like having to, talk in front of a group or you get in a traffic jam or, someone butts in front of you in a line, you all of a sudden don't care. It gives you a little more perspective to go, oh, okay, this isn't that big of a deal. Like I was at a CVS or whatever the other day, and this lady's in front of me, and she's checking out, and I'm kind of in a rush, and she goes, hold on, to the clerk. She literally walks back and goes and looks for more items as I wait, and I'm going. At first, my first reaction was to be like, you got to be kidding me, lady. And then I was like, you know what?
Yeah,
it's fine. Like, this isn't a big deal in terms of time and space. And it also kind of gives you perspective where I kind of had the space to be able to be like, she could be getting medicine for her sick kid. I'm just going to pretend that's probably it, and then you kind of,
good attitude.
I don't know, give people some leeway. So I think by putting ourselves in these situations where we face like real challenge, real discomfort, we come back into our normal lives and we have a lot different perspective and we're better for it.
I was just about to say I was reading something recently, but now I'm thinking I read it in the early part of your book where you correct me if I'm wrong here, but you were talking about how, I want to try to phrase this right, but it's like you've got like a certain number of problems you're going to deal with, and if you take away the big ones, you'll just transpose them onto like smaller things until eventually all the small stuff is feeling like big problems. Is that you who was writing about that?
Oh yeah. So this is a idea that is called the sciencey term for it is called prevalence-induced concept change, but you can kind of just think about it as problem creep. So what happens with the human brain is that when we face a problem, when a problem gets removed, it's not like we have fewer problems. We just find new problems. So what happens over time as the world gets more comfortable and we start removing more and more problems, we don't actually have less problems in our life. We just find things that used to not be as problematic, but now we're going to call them a problem. So it's kind of like the science of first world problems, more or less.
Yeah,
it's like
that's it. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So it's like if my problem is I don't have food for dinner, I'm not going to care about, I don't know, that someone said something to me that was like, maybe they meant it bad or maybe not. Like, I just don't care. But if all of a sudden now everything is comfortable, well, I'm going to start nitpicking at these things that probably I wouldn't have found problematic before. And that's going to stress me out more or less,
I had heard somebody years ago who, it's so long ago, I can't really remember the context, but they had learned from somebody in an indigenous tribe this idea that they had that you always had 75 problems. So as soon as you solved one, new one crops up, and that you will always have that number of problems. So rather than trying to erase all your problems, instead, being grateful for how small some of your problems are, which I really appreciate. And it reminds me of like the Maslow hierarchy of needs kind of concept, where I look around at our culture today and all of the everybody's so, triggered and offended and outraged. And it seems to me that we're doing really, really well. If these are some of these issues that we're arguing about right now are so petty, but you look in 100 years ago, some of the stuff we were dealing with, and you're like, oh, I get it now. Like we have crawled out of some really, really serious problems. And so now we're at this point where most of us are living, because even, you look at even some of the worst living conditions for people on this continent are sort of better than some of the best living conditions, a couple 100 years ago.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that people often aren't aware of just how comfortable the world has become in the last 100 years. Yeah. So, for 2.5 million years, life was very challenging. It was very hard. Rarely were people comfortable. And then just since the Industrial Revolution, more or less, everything that affects your daily life, I mean, literally is 100 years old or less,
Yeah.
And these are all things that are designed to make things easy. And to your point, it's like 100 years ago, think of all the challenges you probably faced. Like you probably worked in some crappy factory that had no rules or regulations, or you had to work out on a farm, or you had to, whatever. The point is that it was hard. And nowadays it's like people sit behind a screen, and what ends up stirring them up is like, oh, someone sent me a mean email. We live in a world where something called a microaggression is an actual thing.
Yeah, that people are hurt by it. You're like, wow. I mean, I'm amazed sometimes at how hurt someone will be by a microaggression, where it's like in the past you might lose an arm or something, or die.
Yeah, exactly. And there was no recourse for it. It was like, well, good luck,
right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's fascinating. And I'm one of those optimists who I think the world is, if you look at the data, the world is absolutely getting better in every way. If you actually poll people though, they will say, I think only 6% say the world is getting better. So I guess I'm a 6%er there. So, but I think that also indicates, something is somewhat amiss. And so I think part of my book is trying to get to, well, why is there that discrepancy when we live in so much comfort and things are so easy? You would think we would be so much happier and healthier, but we're actually not, So I think the problem is that we've tipped so far into comfort, and comfort is great, but we don't have the perspective to be like, well, maybe I need to try some stuff and get out of my comfort zone to sort of offset all the comfort I live in. We're at one extreme pole right now. And if we just added some stuff from the other pole, we'd have a nice happy medium. So that's sort of what the book really gets into.
Yeah, that's interesting because, when you look at hunting and gathering peoples, they tend to have very low mental health issues and they tend to be very happy people. It's interesting looking at, the Inuit, who are just like notoriously pleasant demeanored people living in probably some of the harshest conditions in the world. Or, and I can think of so many examples of that. Werner Herzog's documentary, The Happy People, looking in, people in Siberia and this really hard life and their happiness. Or I mentioned that book about Ernest Shackleton, where what really amazed me was in this really horrible survival situation, the men's diaries, they kept talking about how, this is really actually a pretty nice life. Like, I'm not really wanting to get back to England. And they're barely scraping by. And so how do you see us? I want to talk about your hunt a bit, but I want to ask you, like, how do you see us finding that kind of a balance? Like, what does that look like for people who have success, who have endless hot water, endless heat, endless food? I mean, just a glut of calories, easy transportation, we have all of that stuff. So how do we do that in a balanced way? What does it look like? We'll get right back to the show in a moment, but first, this episode of the WildFed podcast is brought to you by the Salmon Sisters of Alaska. I had a great time interviewing Emma and Claire, aka the Salmon Sisters, for episode 51 of this podcast called Made of Salmon. These ladies grew up homesteading in Alaska, where they still live and work commercial fishing for salmon, halibut, and Pacific cod. If you love wild food and you want to sample or fill your freezer with wild-caught Alaskan salmon, cod, or halibut, head over to aksalmonsisters.com where the coupon code WildFed gets you 20% off your first order of wild fish. Check out their Wild Alaska Coho Salmon Box for vacuum-sealed serving-size portions, or their Wild Alaskan Sockeye Box for full fillets that'll feed your family and fill your freezer. They've got a smoked sockeye box with ready-to-eat smoked salmon in pouches and their smoked salmon tins, which are also ready to eat. While you're there, check out their beautiful cookbook, their super cool women's clothing line, and their own custom line of printed Extra Tough brand boots. Head over to aksalmonsisters.com to check out their store and use the coupon code WildFed to get 20% off your first order of wild Alaskan fish. Now, back to the show.
I think we need to figure out ways to consciously push back against comfort and sort of embrace discomfort. And I think one of the issues, I guess you'd call it, is that we are constantly looking for a silver bullet. And the reality is that our lives were so much different in every single aspect. You know, you talked about food. It was that we would face temperature changes, is that we would have to go, we would spend most of our time outside. We had to do hard physical things. Exercise wasn't even invented just because life was essentially a workout, right?
It's such a luxury to exercise.
Yeah. So I think it's trying to figure out how do we integrate a handful of different things. So, you know, in the book, I identify different ways that we can do this, I think, that link back to evolution. I think spending more time outside is important. So I lay out, there's a researcher I met in Boston who is investigating what she calls the nature pyramid. And it basically suggests that different doses of different time in nature give us these sort of optimal health and mental health effects. So 3 times a week for 20 minutes in like a park or whatever nature you have by your house moves the dial. But then to sort of move the dial further, she suggests 5 hours in a more wild space, at least once a month. And then once a year, you should spend at least 3 days out in someplace that's as wild as possible.
Yeah.
And yeah, man. And what happens there? So she's fascinating because she'll actually take neuroscience tools out into the wild and scan people's brains. And what she finds is people arrive and they're frenetic. They're just worked up. They're anxious. They're like every other modern person. And she scans their brains and she finds they have these really high grade brain waves called theta waves and beta waves that are, associated with anxiety and whatever. But by day 3, they've lapsed into what are called alpha waves. Now, these are the brain waves that are associated with experienced meditators, and people just, report feeling so much more calm and zen and just collected and present. And it's funny because people generally, we don't like to go outside because it's uncomfortable. There's wind, there's rain, there's temperature changes. But once we actually get out there and go through a little bit of discomfort of being out there for a while, once we've sort of hit this tipping point, we're like, oh man, this is great.
I don't want to go back in.
Exactly. In terms of, I think exercise is a really fascinating topic because, like I mentioned before, we've essentially had to invent it. Exercise was never a thing because why would you do that? You'd end up dying because you'd wasted through calories when calories were at a premium.
It kind of be like saying like it's like the idea of like wild mice ever inventing a wheel to run on.
Yeah.
Why would they do it, right?
Yeah, you nailed it exactly. When you look at it, what I think is interesting is that when you look at the human body, we have basically evolved to run and carry. So we would run down prey in the heat, and eventually over time that animal would become exhausted, and then we would spear it and we would have dinner. And these they're called persistence hunts, could last for like 15 miles, 20 miles. And then we would carry the animal back to camp. And so I think when you look at how we do exercise or physical activity in today's world, it's like a lot of people go to the gym and they do like biceps curls and whatever. But we evolved in this concept of like endurance and carrying things and going over rough ground and having to navigate terrain and having this challenge also of like tracking the animal. So I think even something as simple as trail running or something like that, or rucking, as you
Yeah.
talked about, because it gives us this strength element that we used to have when we were carrying, I think can move the dial a lot too, because then you're also getting outside as well. So it's thinking, how can we integrate all this stuff into a system that we can add back into our lives? And, they've done research on people, brain scans on people who exercise indoors versus outdoors. And the outdoor exercisers tend to be a lot calmer and also have a sharper mind, because if I'm running on a treadmill, I can just completely zone out. I can watch, whatever, Dog the Bounty Hunter or whatever weird show. Yeah. But if I'm outside, I'm having to navigate terrain. I live in Las Vegas and I live close to a nice desert trail network, but the rocks on that trail are pretty gnarly and jagged. Mm-hmm. And so, if I fall, I'm going to be paying for that. I have to really think about navigation and also pacing and all these different things, where if I'm in a gym, I just don't have to think about that at all.
Dude, that piece is so huge for me. I think about terrain a lot. And I just for many years have been into barefooting. And so I love the way different terrain first challenges you, and then eventually, like I'm sure you experience out on those trails out there where you've got that almost like lunar or like Martian landscape out there. You start to be able to predict how stones will move and how you'll slide and going into a corner or something like that. And you start to work with the land. Whereas like you're saying, in the indoor environment, it's just homogeneous. It's a homogeneous temperature. It's a homogeneous flat environment. Your ankles are never required to recover from anything because the surface is so predictable. And I love, like, one of the things I love about the outdoors, particularly because I live in a place with, 4 seasons. So sometimes I'm out on mossy, wet stuff. Sometimes I'm out on frozen lakes, sometimes I'm on soft sand, all those different environments. It's like, similarly, it's like the sine wave kind of thing. I remember learning about how a really consistent heart rate isn't really good for you. A really consistent heartbeat's not really good for you. You want it to be challenged up and down. You don't want a consistent sine wave. And I started thinking about temperature and how it's like, oh, people are like that. They don't want, it to go below 65 and they don't want it to go above 65. They start complaining. And so they wipe out the sine wave and do the flat line. And I was like, man, you don't want a flat line in your heart. You want that like fluctuation. And so fluctuation of temperature, fluctuation of gradient, fluctuation of the consistency of the texture of the thing beneath your feet and all of that. On the topic of the outdoors, though, I want to ask you about your hunting experience, and in particular, did you have any experience with hunting before? Did you do any hunting or angling? Did you ever, raise livestock or slaughter livestock, or did you have any experience around that component of the sort of killing component?
I would say mostly no. I grew up fly fishing. So I grew up in northern Utah, and there's definitely some good rivers up there. So I did fly fish a bit, but in terms of hunting, no. I mean, I went on a hunt when I was a kid with some guys, but it was, for them, it was mostly, we're just going to go in the woods and tip back some whiskey,
Yeah, right.
And I had done the hunt in Nevada with Donnie, but he was up there, I think, for maybe 2 weeks, and just because of work commitments, I only spent 4 days with him, so I wasn't there for the actual when he did kill an elk. So no, I had not really done much serious hunting before, and I was definitely reticent going into it. I didn't know what to expect. I didn't know how I felt, but I found it to be a really enriching process for sure.
Do you see yourself? Do you identify as a hunter today? Do you see that being part of your life, or just sort of an adventure that you had an experience with?
That's a good question. I would like to continue hunting for sure. I've put in for tags and that kind of stuff. Do I identify as a hunter? I don't know. I'm of the mind that I try not to identify with any one thing ever, because I don't want to be too committed to that. And if that ever goes away, then I think that can be a little bit weird. It raises some questions. I do want to keep hunting. I don't think it's going to be the only thing I do. I do love doing sort of long, sort of extreme trail runs as well. So thinking about training not only for hunting, but also for things like that, I think will be part of my repertoire. But yeah, I mean, I'm definitely, to answer your question, I will continue hunting for sure. I found it fascinating because, a lot of times when we go out into nature and face these things, it's more of controlled environment. And when you go on a hike, sort of the point is to go from point A to point B, and you come
On
back,
trail. On
yeah,
trail.
yeah, on a
Yeah.
trail.
Yeah.
And with hunting, there's this goal that I think really taps into something
Mm-hmm.
human. You have
Yeah.
this objective, and it's an objective that man has had since we started eating meat, whenever it was 2 million years ago. And I think that taps into something deep inside us. Like when we were out there, stalking caribou, it's like you just you get in the zone, and it's shocking how quickly you can do that. It's almost like, I have a German short hair pointer. I've never hunted with him, but when that dog sees a bird, he points,
Yeah.
And I almost found that in myself as we were sort of crawling across this Arctic tundra, because we had spied this herd of caribou, and they were going to come up over this saddle. So we start crawling in, and it's like, it just it felt natural, which, that this is not something you can quantify. You cannot measure it. It's not necessarily scientific, but I can tell you that it was there. When I got in that position, it was like there was something inside me that sort of clicked. And so I can definitely see myself wanting to revisit that for sure.
How does once you have actually killed an animal and you start the process of cleaning it, if you showed that to a person who, just anybody from let's say a typical urban American environment, and you show them that scene to them will be shocking, like a horror movie is shocking. It's jarring. They'll want to push it away. And that desire to push it away, it's like they convince themselves that it's wrong because they didn't like the way it looked. And then as you spend time with it, that starts to change, right? Like, I'm tempted to say that you get desensitized to it, but the reality is it's backwards, because everybody for those 2.5 million years you're talking about was exposed to this. And it's actually that people have become ultra sensitized to it. But for whatever, let's just use that language. You kind of get desensitized to it pretty fast. And then for me now, as somebody who, all the meat in my house is stuff that I've harvested, it's like I don't see the blood or organs or any of that, even the killing part of it. It doesn't shock me. It doesn't bother me anymore. I'm like very comfortable with it in most circumstances. I'm curious about that part and how it relates to this comfort thing, because this seems like one of those areas that we're talking about where people have this incredible comfort. They don't have to see what food is, because even if we're talking about plants, I mean, we're talking about killing plants. We're not just talking about it's not like, plants just give their bodies to us, right? So there's all this killing involved to get food, because food is body parts from living things. And people have gotten so soft around that too. So I'm curious about that part for you and how you see that play into the psychological component of the comfort thing.
Sure. Well, we've sanitized death from our lives in all aspects, because I think, having to face death and mortality, whether it's our own, whether it's that of another living being, because it reflects back on the fact that we're going to die one day, we've sanitized it because it's the most uncomfortable thing to think about. So if you think about how our meat is presented, even in the grocery store, it's like this thing that's in this package, right? We try to remove all indication that it came from a living animal. We have these names for cuts instead of saying like exactly what muscle it came from. We just,
or we say beef, poultry, we have those words that mask it as well.
Exactly. It's sort of euphemisms for the fact that this came from a living animal. Even our funeral system is very, the person dies, we try and make them look alive as possible so we can look at them one time, and then it's like, see you later. And then, what are you told after someone dies? You're told to keep busy and take your mind off it, don't think about it. So I don't think we think about death. And as it relates to hunting, I know for me, so once we had, found these caribou and stalked in on them, and, I go in with Donnie, and this herd comes over this hill, and I think there's probably about 30 of them. And there was this one that we could see from the scope that was limping, and he was old, and it was like, that was my bull. And even at that moment, I'm kind of going, I don't know if I want to do, like, in my mind, I'd come all the way up to Alaska to experience this. And even then I was reticent about pulling that trigger. And, I don't know, like I definitely had some hesitation and moments. And then I just had a moment in the scope and I pulled it, and then I pulled it again, and the animal went down, and it was like, holy shit, what did I just do? Like I was an emotion. I mean, it was just like, it was like a freight train just hit like all the feels in my heart, and I was just like, oh my God, what have you done, dude? What have you done? There's no turning back. And so we come up on this animal, and it's like resting perfectly in the grass in the tundra with this like beautiful landscape behind it. It looks just like something from Disney. And I'm like, I'm a mess. And thank God I went with Donnie, because he's very aware and respectful of that process,
Emotionally intelligent man, for sure.
Very, very high emotional IQ. And he just goes, hey man, we'll go get your stuff. We'll be back, So he left me there for,
Right
5,
That's
10
awesome.
minutes. And that was really important for me to process what was going on. And I mean, I'm not going to lie. I was sad. I was,
Did you cry?
like, man, this is heavy. I did cry. Yeah. I mean, I definitely shed some tears. Like, it was just very heavy. You look at that thing and it's like, I killed it. But then here's the thing. Once we start actually, taking apart the animal, cutting the meats off so we could pack it back to camp, I stopped seeing like this narrative of this like living creature that was very human-like and had friends and family and, whatever. Yeah. And you start to see more a giver of life. Now that does not take away at all the respect that I had for that animal. In fact, it enhances it, because it forced me to face that life cycle and realize when I put meat in my mouth, it is coming from an animal, whether it's this one on the Arctic tundra or one that is in a slaughterhouse in Iowa or wherever that may be. So I can tell you that totally changed my relationship with meat. Ever since I started hunting, which is counterintuitive, I eat a lot less meat because I realize what it takes for me to eat meat. There's a heavy emotional buy-in, and I'm a lot more conscious and aware of that now. So that was definitely one of the great payoffs of this trip, and having to go through that discomfort of pulling that trigger, realizing that the only way that I'm ever going to keep living is if something else dies, whether it's a plant or an animal. And one day I myself am going to die, and I will help some other thing live, whether it's, I'm buried and a tree springs up or whatever. I mean, just seeing that life cycle process is unbelievably rewarding. And what's fascinating is that there's sort of this global wave of research happening that shows the more aware people are of this life cycle and the fact that we're going to die one day, the happier they tend to be, because it tends to focus us in life. It cuts away a lot of the petty BS, and it sort of helps us focus on what ultimately makes us happy. It just trims the fat from our life. It's like, if I go into my day knowing that, hey man, you don't have a lot of time left, you're going to die one day, I'm not going to get worked up about stupid stuff like traffic jams and whatever. I'm going to be nicer to people that I see in line, or, the guy who cuts in front of me with his car, I'm going to give him an inch. It's just like, I don't have time to be worked up for that. And I'm going to focus on doing things that are truly going to make me happy and make the people that I love happy, really just focus on what's going to matter.
Dude, I love this story you're telling, because it's so counterintuitive to the public, right? Like people would think the opposite. You go out there, you kill this animal, it turns you to the dark side. And instead, what you're talking about is becoming it's instilling in you or awakening in you more of the virtues that everybody knows they want. And, that part's really interesting to me. And that piece about the death reminders, because one thing that's always really freaked me out about how we do our funerary rites is a big piece of it seems to be about trying to rob our body, or rob the ecosystem of our bodies. So like we borrow all this carbon and all these minerals, and we construct this body, and then when we die, we try to fill it with preservatives and put it in concrete boxes so that it can't be broken down, right? Like, so it's an eternal thing. And to me, it's always like, oh wow, that's like, we really want to be angels, not apes, so badly.
Yeah.
And so it's like, I want to never be broken down. I don't want to go back in the life cycle or burn my body so that my proteins can't, be used by anything else. It's like a way of keeping yourself, trying to eliminate yourself from that cycle. Obviously you can't really, but it's fascinating to me. I really like to keep skulls from many animals that I harvest. And to me, there's two things going on. One is a sign of respect. So again, it's counterintuitive to people because people would walk in and be like, it makes me think of that Ace Ventura line where he's like, "This is a lovely room of death." But but it's like, it's not about that. It's a way of respecting the animal to me. Like that skull is like wow, it's what lives on of that animal, and that animal gets a place of honor in my house. But also seeing the skulls, like I ended up with a dental X-ray of my own skull, which I keep on my desktop, and seeing my skull and knowing these, seeing these skulls in my house, it reminds me like where I'm headed ultimately, and to me, I think that's a really, really healthy thing. I kind of wish like my wife could keep my skull later on. Anyway, I'm fascinated by that thing because people misinterpret it, man. And when you tell them I was a vegan for 10 years, I didn't grow up hunting at all. And, came to this late in life. And I had the extreme opposite attitude. So yeah, I'm just curious your thoughts on that, because like I was saying a moment ago, it definitely didn't turn you bad. It kind of sounds like it did a bit of the opposite for you.
No, I would say if anything, yeah, it's the opposite. It turned me light. I mean, like I said, I'm more conscious with my use of meat because I know what that takes to get that now.
Yeah.
One interesting thing in the book is I sort of chase this idea down of, what can recognizing that we're all going to die do for people. And to chase that down, I went to Bhutan. So Bhutan is one of the least developed nations on Earth. It's near India and Nepal. It's one of the least developed nations on Earth, but it's a highly Buddhist nation. And one thing that they really preach in the country is being aware of your own death. And so despite the fact that it's one of the least developed nations on Earth with the least amount of resources and money and things, the Bhutanese rank among the happiest people on Earth. Like they're punching way above their weight. And I met with a Buddhist Lama as well as a economist from Oxford. And these people think that this death awareness, it has a lot to do with it. So death is really woven into the Bhutanese culture. They have, when someone dies, part of what they do is they have this, the body is in a house for 21 days and it just stays there, and people like sort of live around it. There's all these processes around it, and meals. And eventually they burn the body in front of all their friends and family. It's like this big celebration. And then the ashes are taken and they're molded into these little clay pyramids. And these clay pyramids are put all throughout the country. Like you just see them all over roadsides and every windowsill. And when I say everywhere, I mean they're everywhere,
Yeah.
And this is a constant reminder,
Cool.
You're going to die. And all their art, it really focuses on death and what that means. And a lot of their folklore centers around death. And, they're some of the happiest on earth. And so I met with this Buddhist Lama who, like I said, he told me that it focuses our mind on that which is going to make us happy. And it makes us a lot more compassionate and caring for others and just more focused in our life. And it was funny because to meet him, in Bhutan, you have to hire a driver to take you around places. It's part of the deal with going into the country. And I had this driver who essentially had a smart car, and this Buddhist leader I met, he's literally living up in this, shack near a monastery on a cliff. And this driver had to essentially four-wheel this smart car all the way up this twisty, winding mountain road. Just like, holy hell, man, I'm going to have to buy you a new car after this. But after about an hour, I walk to this, he drops me off, and there's like this cliffside trail to this Buddhist Kempo is what he's called, shack. And I get in there and it's just exceedingly Spartan. And I go into the first room. There's nothing there. I go into the second room. It's this like very spare kitchen, running water, a cook pot. That's about it. I go into the next room It's like incense smoke fills my nose. There's this big like statue of the Buddha, and I look, and there's this guy with like the light beaming into his face, and he's in the lotus position, and full on robes, bald head, and he just looks at me and he says, "Welcome." And it was just like, oh my God, this is unbelievable. This is like,
oh, a lot of people looking for that to happen, and it often is disillusioning. It's pretty cool you experience that.
Dude, it was like you couldn't have even wrote it. I was like, if someone was saying, yeah, just make up the most cliche scene you could ever think of. Like the Westerner coming to like steal the wisdom.
I'm looking for the meaning of life.
That was it, man.
Yeah, and the smart car ride up there adds a lot to it for me.
Oh, yeah. So anyways, but that conversation with him lasted a couple hours. And we just talked about, thinking about death and his perspective on it and what it can do for us. And I definitely left with a new perspective on life and death. That's for sure.
It's interesting when somebody has like a death scare, like either because they had like a close encounter, or maybe they had like a medical thing where they thought maybe they were really sick, how quickly they start to change their behavior. Like you said, like you start to remember who you care about, what you care about, what's really important. And then also when somebody dies, that thing of like, we don't speak ill of the dead. So there'll be like a person who maybe you found them a little unsavory, didn't really like them, whatever, they die. And all of a sudden you only remember their like positive qualities, So this like close encounters with death, they do seem to really shift our perspective in that positive way. And I think that's one of the big things you're talking about in our culture, man, that we have, like you said, I think you said sanitized it, man, it's hard to find. And it's one of the things I really love about hunting is just that it puts me really close to it. And I worry so much about a kind of Soylent Green, Brave New World type future, because, when I look at hunting into the future, I worry about, will it exist in perpetuity in the way that it does today legally? And I really hope that it does. I want to be part of that. But I do get kind of concerned about a world where people no longer have the ability to participate. I was the other day in a supermarket, and it was the first time I'd saw Impossible Burger, like all stacked up, in a deli case. And I said to my wife who, because she teaches and she works with kids one-on-one now in the COVID era, I was like, babe, can you imagine, if you were teaching in 50 years, saying to kids like, yeah, it's going to be hard to believe this, but when I was younger, like meat came from animals, like kids being like, oh my God, what? So I'm wondering about your prognosis for the future, because it seems to me that in psychology and in exercise science and all these places, a lot of the things you're talking about there's almost like a revolution happening and people are becoming aware of these things. But then when you look at how people are living, we're getting kind of further and further away from it. So, how do you seem optimistic. You said, I think the world's just getting better and better and better. How do you see the future playing out with regard to the kind of things we're talking about?
With hunting, I think it'll be interesting because I think what we have right now that's key, and you mentioned it, is this pandemic, I think, is really sort of a critical tipping point for how our lives are going to change. I mean, if people didn't move that much before, I think there's a stat out there that our ancestors moved 14 times more than us every day. Well, I can probably tell you if, your commute to the office is rolling out of bed and walking in, into the living room, we're looking at 28 times more,
Right.
So I think you're going to see a real sea change in people's lives, people becoming more solo. We're going to have less face-to-face interaction. In terms of, your thoughts on hunting, yeah, that worries me too, man, because I know I got a lot out of it. It's something that I would really love to continue doing throughout my life. And, working towards that, I think one of the rewards of hunting is that it takes so much effort to do it. And there's so many hoops you have to jump through. But, it's sort of the overall thesis of this book, the harder something is to attain, once you attain it, it's probably a better payoff. And I do worry because it does get people outside, it gets people moving. And it, like we were just saying, that people are forced to face the life cycle. And it's definitely worrisome. I do think that there are enough people that do it and enough sort of financial backing behind it now that it will probably be safe, but you can never predict the future. And I just hope that we can do it in a way that introduces more people to it while also realizing that this is a very finite resource that needs to be respected, right? It's one of those things where it's like, you don't want everyone doing it, but I think everyone would be a lot better if they did it at least once. So how do we do that in a realistic, sustainable way, you know?
Yeah, because
I
so
don't
much
know
of
the
what goes
answer.
on so much of what's happening in nature now is like this hands-off stuff. Where nature, what concerns me when I look at outdoor athletics and outdoor sports is that a lot of times nature just becomes a stage upon which you do your narcissistic sport.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I don't mean narcissistic like negatively against the people participating in it, but it's often about me, like how fast
Mm-hmm.
am I? How do I compete? How do I rank? All that kind of stuff. How good's my equipment? How cool is my equipment? All these like things that are where nature is just this stage, but not the actual placenta that keeps life in existence. And so for me as a hunter versus me as a hiker, because I've done both, it's like for me as a hunter, I'm a participant in all of this. And I am forced because, like you brought up earlier, I think a big part of it is having that goal. So that goal gets me to endure discomfort. I'm willing to get up earlier than I like, and that sucks. And I'm willing to get dirtier than I like, and that sucks. And I'm willing to sit out in the cold longer, and all of those things that I'm willing to do to achieve the goal that I'm not willing to do for a lot of just general recreation. But bigger than that for me is like, I think all kind of circling this conversation around is that there's that death component and that knowledge of how that I am a part of, not an alien who has come down to visit Earth and I get to explore it. It's like I'm from here, I'm part of it. And so seems so important. I'm in this place of
I agree.
I'm a little concerned about the future of the world and the direction we're headed. Cause like you said, it looks like I'm seeing more and more ads, for instance, of, people basically doing virtual reality workouts where they feel like they're in a class, but they're really in front of the mirror at their house, or, this idea of people sort of pod living where they never see other people and they never leave their home. So yeah, it's interesting. Do you think that do you think that, how to say it, like that this it looks like this 3D printed food, Impossible Burger, living in a pod story could be a reality for a lot of humans heading into the future, and maybe that's like takes some strain off of the ecosystem. I don't know, but man, I mean, what kind of life do people want, right?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I think there's probably costs and benefits to everything.
Yeah.
I mean, if fake meat is a lot better for the environment and also saves a lot of animals from the horror show of modern slaughterhouses, well, that seems like a good thing. At the same time, there's also something strange about that. And I think that there are, like we've been talking about this whole time, there's benefits to understanding the life cycle and realizing these things. So it's, everything in life is trade-offs. But I do like the point that you brought up about sort of the meification of outdoor sports and how so much of it is, I think you're hinting at to put something on Instagram or to, go on some app that tracks your pace and be like, well, I did it faster than this guy. And I think that takes a lot out of the experience. I mean, for me, at least, I can speak for myself. When you remove these artificial metrics, because that's all it is, right? It's like a marathon is just some distance we made up, a mile is some distance we made up. It's all just made up.
Yeah, and pretty arbitrary.
Yeah. And we like put so much emphasis on just trying to like one up the next guy with whether it's a fitness thing or even in hunting, something like, well, how big is this animal's rack? It's like, well, why are we're putting value on that? Probably because it has something to do with the size of the animal. There might be something in that, but it's like, that's like the wrong reason to do it. Like just measuring yourself against others to me is not, it's fine. I'm glad you got out there and did something, but I think that there's probably people will experience a lot more internal reward and internal positive change in their lives if they remove sort of those artificial metrics, those measuring themselves against others, and just do things for the sake of personal growth. And a lot of times that takes removing that kind of stuff, So if you're hunting and that's, you're putting yourself in a position where you're going to get out, you're going to spend a lot of time, and you're going to choose, the animal that in the moment is right for you, not based on, oh, well, his antlers are this big, and I don't think that's going to make the record book, so I'm not going to take that shot. Or, well, I'm going to go outside and run this distance, but I got to do it in this time because my neighbor did it in that time. And, that's not going to force that positive internal change that I think will benefit people on a deeper level. I think that's only adding to the neuroses of modern life that we already have,
Well, Michael, I want to say I go into the bookstore when I can find one, and I get so overwhelmed by what sometimes feels like so many unnecessary books that didn't need to be written. Is what I mean. I'll just say that, and so much superfluous, like just books written to be written. I think this is a really valuable contribution that you've made with this book. I really do, and I appreciate that you are delivering what could be bitter medicine, but in a way that doesn't feel like that. The book is uplifting, and your tone and the way you communicate this stuff is really uplifting, so that it's not like you're doing it wrong and you need to suffer. Nothing you've said comes across that way. So I just want to say thanks for your time today. Thanks for writing this book, and vulnerably kind of sharing your story too. But mostly I want to say thanks for the way that you're communicating it, because it's the way that people need to hear it. Like, hey, this makes your life better. Not like, hey, you're doing it wrong. I just think you're doing an awesome job with this thing that, how do you say it? This kind of story that you're telling. It's really awesome, man. So thank you so much for today.
Awesome. Well, I really appreciate those kind words, and I massively appreciate you having me on. It was definitely fun chatting, for sure.
Where do you want? I went to your website and saw that you've got all the kind of ways people can get your books, and also like see other stuff you've written. But I just want to give you the space to share any kind of social media stuff, anything like that you want to plug.
Yeah, sure. Go to my website. It's eastermichael.com, and you can actually download a free chapter if you don't want to dive in all the way yet. The first chapter is up there, and I'm on Instagram at Michael_Easter. If you just kind of want to follow along with some stuff, I kind of put random thoughts that deal with this topic up on Instagram. I try not to use my phone that much, but it's increasingly hard today. So,
and they can see your beautiful dog.
Yeah, you can see my dog. That's what people really come for. Let's be honest here. God.
Thanks for listening to the WildFed podcast. You can help us grow this show by subscribing and leaving us a rating and review. It ensures better rankings and more advertiser interest, which translates directly into better shows, more awesome guests, and a constant stream of fresh, new content. Have a question you'd like answered on the show, or a hunting, fishing, or foraging trip you'd like to host us on? Email us at info@wild-fed.com. And be sure to visit our website, wild-fed.com, to check out the WildFed video show and store. WildFed. Food is all around you.